Hey, so I've been playing a bunch of the Steam Next Fest demos and trying out various new indie games, and there've been a few pretty great ones in the bunch, like Enguard and such, but a really big standout that everyone is losing their minds over these days is definitely Viewfinder. This is a sort of really cool looking puzzle game where the main gimmick is that you can pick up photographs and position them to overlap them with reality, only to then be able to walk into the world of the photograph as it changes the world around you. I mean, the first time that you do this in the game, even if you already know the mechanic, is really mind-blowing. The implementation on the technical end is virtually flawless. I can't imagine how much work it must have taken to polish it to this degree that it's at now in the game. I especially love the bit in the demo where you're jumping in and out of completely different art styles, and the little polish that comes with that sequence, like the slightly different sounding footsteps and everything. Even if this was literally the entire thing that the game was about and it was just a walking simulator, I'm sure that I could have some fun with it for more than a couple of hours, no problem, just jumping in and out of various photographs. But I do have one slight worry about this game, which is that I'm concerned about how deep the actual puzzles in the game will be. Now, obviously, I understand they're not going to put their hardest puzzles in the demo. I'm not complaining that the demo was too easy or anything. But it feels like this mechanic, especially when you gain the ability to take photographs yourself, just feels insanely powerful and versatile, and I'm a little worried about how hard that might make it to design meaningful puzzles around that mechanic. As Brando Sando once said in regards to magic systems, limitations are more interesting than powers. Essentially, the idea that he's getting at is that it's important to recognize what you can't do with a magic system, even more so than what it enables you to do. And I think that this principle can be applied to game mechanics and game design in much of the same way. The camera is an insanely powerful tool and seemingly lets you take pictures of anything in the game, which lets you duplicate any kind of geometry or even puzzle elements to your heart's content, and the only limitation is seemingly how many pictures you can take at a time, which, to be fair, I think could make for some interesting puzzles if used to great effect. But to go on a bit of a tangent, Viewfinder reminds me a lot of a puzzle game from not too long ago called Superliminal. That game is also a game where you play with a lot of mind-bending optical illusions and play around with various perspective-based puzzles and whatnot. But I personally found that game to be fairly lacking in the depth of its puzzle mechanics. A lot of the puzzles involving the basic idea of using perspective to warp an object's size mostly boiled down to either building a bridge to the exit or making something big enough to hit more than one button. One puzzle in particular that I really personally didn't like, and I think it acts as a microcosm of how this game was designed, is this one level where you're trapped in a circular hallway with seemingly no way out. If you observe your environment, you can probably pretty quickly realize that there's no ceiling, so based off of the puzzles you've done already, all you need to do is bridge your way out of there. And the hallway is full of random objects, so surely you could just grab something and use it to leave, right? Well, not exactly, because despite all the clutter being there, almost none of it is actually interactable. The actual solution is that you have to grab this random exit sign, which turns out to be the only interactable object in the room, and then you can use it to bridge out of there. It's one of the most frustrating places you can put a player in a puzzle game, because I knew right away where the goal was, and I even figured out what the solution was. The only issue was that I didn't know what I was actually allowed to interact with on that particular level in order to actually implement the solution. Now sure, not every level is necessarily that bad, and overall I'd still call the game an enjoyable experience, especially since they do make up for the lack of depth in their puzzle mechanics by swapping out what the main mechanic is every few levels. But there's a reason why games like Portal are very deliberate in its visual design. Valve actually talked about this exact problem when designing Portal, that playtesters kept getting distracted by the random objects that weren't meant to be puzzle elements. So that's why they went with the more sterile laboratory environments instead of the more cluttered Half-Life style environments to help keep players focused on what actually mattered for those puzzles. But I've gone on a tangent about other games for long enough. To try and circle this all around back to Viewfinder, one thing going in its favor, at least in this regard, is that it does tend to make the puzzle elements very distinct with this bright orange paint job to make them stand out from the mostly white and pastel environments. But, like I said, I do worry about just how powerful the picture-taking mechanic is, and in turn how complex the puzzles that they can design around it will be. In the demo, I discovered a wide variety of ways to solve this one puzzle where you have to get a battery that's up on a pillar, and that's really cool. You could take a picture of the battery and just place it somewhere lower. You can make a bridge up to it by taking a picture of the ground and positioning it accordingly. There's even an Easter egg-based solution where you can place this other photo of a video game that has a power-up that lets you jump higher. And I even discovered that if you then take a picture of that power-up to duplicate it so that you can get a second one, that in turn lets you jump absurdly high into the air. But oftentimes, when so many solutions are viable, a concept called dominant strategy starts to take over. Why bother exploring all these other alternatives when something as simple as just taking a picture of the battery solves the problem almost instantly with virtually no effort? It's kind of like how in Tears of the Kingdom, once everyone realized that you can make a jet bike with 2 fans and a steering wheel, that essentially trivialized all of the Korok escort missions pretty quickly. But that's also why in the shrines in that game, they don't let you just spawn in whatever items you want. It limits you to what you can find in the shrine, which is why I think they're able to still have tons of interesting puzzles, despite how easy it is to do such crazy game-breaking things in that game. Like Brando said, limitations are just as important as a cool mechanic. So yeah, at the end of the day, I do think that Viewfinder will be an enjoyable experience no matter what. The core mechanic is just so well implemented and cool to play around with that I'll at the very least have fun just walking around these cool picture worlds for a few hours. I just hope that, in addition to that, the developers have thought about these mechanics and their limitations, and we're able to come up with some really cool and fun puzzles on top of the interesting mechanics that they're hiding in the full game. But I guess that we'll all just have to wait a couple weeks for when the game comes out in full on July 18th before we can finally see the results for ourselves. So, what do you think? What sorts of interesting puzzles can you imagine are possible with Viewfinder's mind-bending picture mechanics? Do you think I'm right to be worried, or am I just fretting over nothing? Like I always say, I'm happy to continue the conversation down in the comments below, and if you want to see me make more videos like this one, and maybe even see my thoughts on the full game after its release, make sure to let me know by leaving me a like and a subscribe so that you can be notified of when I make more videos in the future like this one. But until then, I will see you guys next time.